Well, hey everybody, glad you're here at Northway. So excited to be a part of that series coming up called Stuff Christians Say. I think it's important that we sometimes take an honest look at some of the things that actually come out of our mouths and whether or not they really should be. So I hope you choose to join us for that 3-part series. But today is the conclusion of this series that we have been calling Stuck. Now, a little over 2 years ago, my family and I moved back to the Pittsburgh area, and we lived in Ohio for about 10 years. And where we lived was an area that was densely populated with an Amish community. Matter of fact, it was the largest population of Amish folks in the whole entire world for one single area. So it wasn't uncommon to be traveling around throughout the community and see men with gigantic beards and, the traditional hat on. You'd see women in the full denim outfit all the way down with their skirt to the ground, and you would see women in also that traditional head covering look. Now, also in that area, there was a Walmart that was very, very, thoroughly shopped by everyone from the community. It was the most shopped Walmart in all of Ohio. So when you got to the checkout line, every single register was open, and there were 8 to 10 people in every single line, and you had to have a strategy to get in and out of there as quickly as possible. So my son was 3 years old, and my wife had him at the store, and they were stuck in the middle of the checkout line, right? And my son, again, 3 years old, by the way, 3-year-olds, they don't have what's called an inside voice. You know what I'm talking about? So my son looks up at my wife, and he says, "Hey, Mom, how come you don't have one of them?" And she just shoots her eyes back and she looks at him, and because she knows something's coming out next. And she looks at him and shakes her head, not knowing what he's talking about. He goes, "Where's your bucket, Mom?" And she looks and he goes, "Like her, how come you don't got a bucket on your head too, Mom?" And she just looks at him and freezes. What do you do in that moment as a parent? It just so happened that our shopping cart happened to be between her and him, and the aisleway was very, very tight. And the Amish women who he was pointing to and referring to looked at her and him, and they didn't give that, "Oh, what a cute little 3-year-old kind of look." They gave a look of really stern disapproval, "Get your kid under control" kind of look. You know what I'm talking about? I'm sure if you're a parent, you have been in a moment just like that. Now, 2 things often come to our minds when we're in a moment, stuck in a moment like that as parents. The first thing is this: I was a much better parent before I had kids, right? Because when you see something like that going on and it's not your kids, you know how to handle it. You've got all the answers, but when it's your kid, there's no manual. You don't know what to do, and you're just kind of fumbling around. And the second thing you think is, I have to stop this immediately. I have to put an end. I've got to put my hand over his mouth. I've got to get up and get out of the situation. If I don't do something, it won't stop on its own. Have you ever had that sort of sentiment or thought in your mind? If I don't, it won't. I mean, it's harmless most times. If I don't, it won't. But there are also some times where that sentiment is actually the seed of where we get stuck. It's actually something that can grow in our lives and something that we really have to pay close attention to. I want to take a look in the Bible at a woman named Martha. And there's a couple of instances where she sort of had this same sentiment that you and I often have. And it's not just parents who have this sentiment. It's every one of us in our lives who have moments where we have this feeling or this thought thinking, if I don't, it won't. There's a really common story that we often use in church dealing with Martha. She also had a sister named Mary. And in the New Testament, as we read about them, it turns out that Jesus was very close friends with this particular family. There's a story where Jesus stops by for a meal at Martha's house. You may have heard of it, as I mentioned, but here's where the story goes. It's found in the book of Luke. Luke picks up this story and helps us see into the life of Martha. And here's what I want to do. Before your mind goes to the conclusion of the story and the point that it always makes in church, I'd like for you to just hold judgment. And I want to zoom in together on Martha and what's actually driving her to do what she does. It's found in Luke chapter 10, starting with verse 38. Here's what it says. Now, as they went on their way, this is Jesus and his disciples, Jesus entered a village. The village is known as Bethany, and it's about 2 miles outside of the city of Jerusalem. And a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went up to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. Now, like I said, many times when we read this story, we focus in on Mary, how she chose to sit at the feet of Jesus, how she soaked in his teaching, and she didn't let herself get troubled with all the stuff that Martha did, right? And that's typically where our minds go. But when you look at Martha, you have to understand what she was doing was not a bad thing. She was actually doing what was culturally expected of anyone who owned a house. You were supposed to be hospitable. You were supposed to host guests. You were supposed to have a meal. But when you look closely at this, Martha was running more than just what we would call a low-grade fever. Jesus said she was agitated, she was distracted, she was disturbed, she was anxious, right? If you notice it, Martha's having a really, really big reaction. Something is causing her to go a little bit crazy. You notice she goes right to Jesus, right? Like when you need help, and if you wanted me to help you, I would hope you would just come and ask me. I hope you wouldn't go to my boss and ask him to ask me to help you, right? But Martha skips it all. She goes right to Jesus and starts letting her frustrations be known, and her frustrations aren't just with Mary. They seem to also be with Jesus. Do you notice she's asking, do you not care? Why don't you jump in and do something? Martha's thinking, if I don't get some help, it won't turn out to be the meal I have pictured in my head. It's pretty clear to see that Martha had a picture of perfect in her mind. And if she didn't step in and do something, if she didn't grab control, it was never going to happen. So it's time to act. If I don't, it won't. See, we're all just a little bit like Martha, right? We've all got pictures in our heads of how things are supposed to be. And that's often where that seed, if I don't, it won't, gets first planted. So a little bit later in the life of Martha and Mary and Jesus, there's another moment recorded in Scripture. It's actually recorded in the very next book of John. And it's a moment where they're experiencing what we would know as tragedy. Mary and Martha's brother named Lazarus has died. And it wasn't necessarily an expected death. And Jesus, as I said, was close with the family, and he learned about the death, but it took him 4 days to get to the scene where they're mourning, where they're weeping, where a crowd had, culturally gathered around them to mourn with them and to weep with them. In John 11, the story picks up with verse 20. Here's what happens. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, Martha got word that Jesus was on his way. She went and met him. But Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Isn't that cool? Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who's coming into the world. Do you find it curious at all that Martha got up and left the house to meet Jesus before he got there? Like, why would you do that? I mean, she said all the right stuff. She had all the good answers. She gets an A and passes that test. You are the Christ. You are the Messiah. You're the Son of God. Anything you ask for can be done. But why go from the mourners? Why go from Mary? Why go to catch Jesus before he gets there? Verse 28 says this, when she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, pay attention to that part, the teacher is here and is calling for you. And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where he and Martha had met. When the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, there's the crowd, they're with Mary in the house, right? They saw Mary rise quickly and go out. They followed her, supposing that she was going to go to the tomb to weep there. Speaking of curiosity, is it interesting that Martha pulls Mary away from the crowd to tell her that Jesus was there? I mean, you said he was the Messiah. You said he's the Christ. You just said that he can do anything, right? Wouldn't you come running in shouting it? But why does Martha pull Mary aside and almost sort of lean into her ear and whisper so no one can hear? Why do that? Why refer to him as a teacher? Not the Messiah, not the Christ. Don't you find that also curious? The scene unravels just a little bit more. As Mary goes out, the crowd follows her. Mary just loses it. She starts weeping almost uncontrollably, and Jesus himself is moved with emotion. The Bible says Jesus wept in that moment because he loved them, and he loved Lazarus as well. And Jesus asks to see where the tomb is because he wants to go and see what he can do. And the crowd is there, and Mary and Martha is there. In verse 38, it says this, "Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, 'Take away the stone.' Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, 'Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days.' Jesus said to her, 'Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?' So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, 'Father, I thank you that you've heard me. I knew that you always hear me. But I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me.' When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, 'Lazarus, come out.' The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, 'Unbind him and let him go.'" Amazing story, right? Jesus calls Lazarus from the dead, and Lazarus is now alive. But once again, did you notice what Martha did? It's like she tried to stop the whole thing from happening. Why would you stop Jesus because you're worried about what 4 days of death smells like if your brother could live? Why do that? Why stop the man who's the Messiah, the Christ, the one who can ask God for anything and it can happen? Why worry about what something smells like before he's about to roll away a stone and call a dead man forward? Why worry about smell? Listen, here's what I know about me. The only time I worry about smells is when someone else is going to smell it. I'm not concerned about something stinking until other people are around. You see, here's what's going on in that moment. Martha isn't worried about Lazarus or Mary. She's worried about the crowd. She's worried what people will think of her. The reason she jumps in and tries to seize control and almost stop Jesus from performing a miracle on her brother nonetheless is because she's afraid of what will people think. I mean, Jesus has a reputation at this point. Not everybody loves what he does. It causes people to talk. I mean, let's just let things be done. Lazarus is dead for 4 days. I also don't want to have to deal with being a social outcast because of what crazy thing Jesus is about to do. So let me say something about the smell, and maybe that will stop him. If I don't, it won't. Do you see it there in Martha? It's this crazy fear of what people think or what people will think if you don't take control. Martha's got some fear driving her persistent control of both of these situations. It's fear of the picture in her mind, picture of perfect, the preferred outcome, the way things are supposed to be. That's driving her in the meal story. And then in the moment with Lazarus, it's this fear of what people think. And that fear that causes us to control is what gets us stuck. It sure got Martha stuck. So where are you like Martha? Where is fear driving your behavior? Where are you seizing control of everything because if you don't, it won't? Where's the crowd's voice so loud in your head that you can't help but take control? Where is the fear of that picture not ever coming true to life, so you better act right now because there's no better time than this? Where is that going on in your life? Is it your career? Do you find yourself behaving in ways you never dreamt or thought you would? Talking about people more than talking to people? Having this timetable in your head of when you should be at this position and how much you should be making, and it's time to make a move now because what if it never happens, right? Is that what's going on in your head? Are you like Martha in your career? What about your kids or your parenting? Is that where this idea of if I don't, it won't, is that where that's really expressing itself? Sort of helicoptering, maybe more than you ever hoped you would with your kids? Maybe way more involved than what really is healthy or even biblical? What about your finances? Where are you trying to seize control of the moment because you're afraid that if you don't, it won't? How about relationships? How about your image and how people see you? Where is it? See, this is really, really important to understand and identify because it's the sort of thing that happens over and over and over in your life and in my life as well. See, I think it's so critical to identify these fears that cause us to live out a life of control, because every time that we have a fear, it's actually an indicator of what's going on deep down inside, right? See, what we fear most in life is actually showing us where we trust God the least. See, if you can take time and really start to mine inside those moments of control and identify the fear, it's actually showing you and me where we're not trusting God with our lives. Fear lives in opposite and stark contrast of faith. So what we fear most shows where we trust God least. In the book of Hebrews, it tells us about the importance of faith. The idea that faith is really, at the end of the day, what it's all about. It says this in Hebrews 11, verse 6, and without faith, it's impossible to please him. Like, faith is really what we should be striving for. I believe at the end of the day, what God wants to do in all of our lives is develop our faith in him, to deepen our trust that he can and he will, and that he is who he said he was, and he'll do what he said he will do. That's what he wants to develop in all of us, in every single area of our life. More trust, deeper faith, but it lives in opposite of fear. Without faith, it's impossible to please him. I think about what fear brings to my life. It brings worry. It brings anxiety. It brings independence and isolation because no one ever understands me. They don't get me, and I've got to pull away because I don't trust anyone else. It puts me in a spot where I'm constantly feeling burdened and heavy and not really feeling joy. But isn't faith the opposite of that? When you experience moments of just incredible faith that God really is who he says he is, don't you experience just this indescribable peace and joy and trust? And somehow, some way, being dependent on him is a good thing, and it's a freeing thing. I mean, which version of you do you want to live out? The fearful, controlling one, or the faithful, trusting one? I mean, when you look at Martha and when you look at our lives, I mean, we really are similar in how fear and control causes us to get stuck. I think the first thing it does in my life and in your life is that it strains our relationships. Think about that story now from Mary's perspective. Think about how Martha, as I said, she sort of jumped the hierarchy and talked right to Jesus. She was sitting there thinking, like, why don't you just ask me? If you need help, here I am. Why don't you ask me? Have you ever been talked about rather than talked to? Do you think well of that person or ill of that person? It strains relationships when fear is causing us to control and do whatever it takes to get what we want. Because if we don't, it won't. The second thing that happens that causes us and is the expression of being stuck because of this fear and control thing is the fact that we experience, as I said, anxiety and worry. The more you and I have to control and hold in life, the more anxious and worrying we become. The heavier our load is. The third thing that happens is in these moments, we find ourselves distorting our view of God. Talk about being stuck, right? I know in my life that when I feel like I have to control things, I start to get really frustrated with God, just like Martha did. Like, Lord, why don't you do something here? Like, I've got a picture, and this is how it's supposed to turn out, and you should be helping make that happen, shouldn't you? See, fear and control, when that's going on in our lives, we're actually putting God in our own box, telling him to do things our way and accomplish our picture rather than his. It's sort of like we create him in our image rather than us being created in his image. Talk about distorted. And talk about stuck. And the fourth thing I think that happens in our lives whenever we get in these moments where we are consumed with this, if I don't, it won't kind of thinking, is that we have the potential to miss a miracle. I mean, do you know that Martha had an incredible moment right in her home, right before her, that Mary seemed to be the only one taking advantage of? You know, culturally speaking, women back then, when the Bible was written, when Jesus walked the earth, women were what was known as a second-class citizen. The cultural expectation of Martha in that moment was to feed all of the men and go into a different room and eat. It was not expected nor accepted of her to sit and listen to the rabbi, to the Messiah, to the teacher. But here was an opportunity. Jesus was welcoming it. And by the way, don't you love how Jesus elevated the status of women? He never looked at them as less than or second class. He said they were beautiful and equal. But Martha, she didn't see that. All she saw was the picture. And then what about the moment with her brother? She almost interrupted a miracle from death to life. Can you imagine what potential miracles perhaps you and I have missed out on because of our striving for control? Because of that fear that tells us and screams at us, if you don't, it won't. You know, I'm convinced in this life, the good things that God has for us, they exist on the other side of our fears. Like all the stuff that God wants to develop and bless us with, and this idea of greater trust and deeper faith in Him, they exist when we step out beyond our fears. So back in November, when Pastor Scott was teaching through the Living Wealthy series, and he was challenging all of us on how we deal with our own money and how we should grow in our generosity. And I remember sitting in week 2 of that series with my wife, and I remember feeling and sensing God's telling me to give a sum of money to a couple that we knew, friends of ours, right? Just to write them a check, and that was it. And I don't know about you, but I know about me, money is one of those areas where I can experience a lot of fear. I can experience a lot of moments where if I don't, it won't, and so I protect it and I control it, and I don't want anyone to talk about it to me, right? I might be the only one that does that, I'm sure. So I'm sitting there and the anxiety is starting to grow, and all those reasons, you know, when God asks you to do something, you can find every reason not to. That wasn't Him, that was the pizza I had before the service, or I'm just making this stuff up, and I'm gonna try and get quadruple confirmation, not single or double, but quadruple. And so on our way out, we go to pick up our kids, and I asked my wife, I said, hey honey, did God show you anything? Was He asking you to give any money? And she goes, no, not at all. And I'm like, sweet, perfect. And so I said, I felt like for a moment, God asked me and us to give a sum of money, and it was a pretty good sized sum of money to this couple. And she looked at me, she goes, well, then give it. I'm like, great. You gave me a really generous wife, God. Thanks a lot, right? But she was right. And so we did. We wrote a check, and we put it in the mail, and it was a big check. Not Publishers Clearinghouse big, but big monetarily, right, for us. And it was November. And this particular sum of money happened to also take us to a point where it wrecked my picture of our finances. Because I have a line of our savings that I don't ever want to dip below for any reason. I want to keep at least this much money. It's not a ton of money, but it's just my own line. And all of a sudden, this check brought us below the Mendoza line, right? And did I mention it was November? And you know what comes in the next month? It's Christmas. And that's a time of year where we end up spending money and we're buying gifts. And all of a sudden, I found myself on December 25th feeling really worried and anxious because the money was less and less and less. And all of a sudden, I started getting chippy with my wife. Getting a little bit strained there and being frustrated that she wanted to go do this or be generous with that. And all of a sudden, relationship with my kids, I had this edge about me and I didn't understand why. And when we got through Christmas, I realized in January, I started to be really frustrated with God too. Because I did what you asked. The money's still not there. You told me to do this, so hello? That ever happened to you? So about 3 weeks into January, on the Saturday when we were commissioning our Beaver Valley campus. We had them, the whole core team, come to our Wexford campus, and we were going to pray for them and send them out as a team to launch the Beaver Valley campus. During that day, I was planning on spending the day with some friends doing some strategic planning. And the night before that Saturday, on Friday night, instead of preparing for the day, I was actually searching and asking God for answers, because I was downright worried and anxious and full of fear about my money and our finances. And so I started searching online, and I found a message where a pastor that I knew was talking about worry and anxiety, and he starts getting into the message, and he starts talking about that verse in Matthew chapter 6 where Jesus says, don't be worried about anything, right? Think about the birds in the air. Like, if God's going to take care of the birds, how much more is he going to take care of you? And the guy who was speaking went on to say about how he was living through a very fearful moment of his life, and what he did is he paused and told God all about his fears. And he asked God to show him a bird to remind him who God really was, so that worry and anxiety didn't overwhelm him. And so control wasn't the story of his life. And so that Friday night, before we commissioned our Beaver Valley team, before I went to work with my friend and do some strategic planning, I did that exact thing. I told God how afraid I was. And I don't know about you, but for me, I grew up sort of thinking that fear was wrong for Christians. I grew up with guilt and shame around this idea of an emotion called fear. I'm not sure where it came from, but I know it was there. And I know the Bible speaks, more than 100 times about fear and not worrying about things. And I always thought that was meant to say that you should never jump in this. This should never be, descriptor of you. This shouldn't be what you experience. But now I start to think about from an opposite perspective. Maybe that's in there so much because it's such a common thing we deal with. And God knew what message we would need to hear. So on Saturday morning, I asked God to show me a bird. And I went about my day, and I went to the friends' strategic meeting, and we spent the day together, and it was awesome. We had about 7 hours of planning, and at the end, I was starting to pack my stuff up, and a woman walked by, and she put a piece of paper under my markers. And I didn't really pay attention to it, and after I got done talking to the pastor of that church, I went and I started to really pack stuff up, and I looked, and I saw that it was a check. Like, a check is unmistakable. You know the shape of a check. And I looked at my friend and I said, you were not supposed to do this. We said it wasn't going to be like payment or anything. I wanted to help you guys. And he said, I insist. We just wanted to help you out a little bit. And I thought, great. He gave me some gas money. That's tremendous, right? So I pack up my stuff, I head back, and I'm coming to the Wexford campus, and I stop at the light right outside of our Wexford campus. And I miss the turning arrow, and so that light tends to be long. If you've ever driven it, you understand what that's like. And I felt like in that moment, go ahead and take a look at that check that you were given. And I open the check, and I look at it, and wouldn't you know it, it's the exact amount that we had given to another family. I mean, to the dollar. Isn't that just like God? And I start crying sitting there in my car. I'm like weeping uncontrollably. And in the moment, I thought it was all about the money. Like, okay, good. I'm back above the Mendoza line, right? But God whispered something to me in that moment. And he showed me that it's really not even about the money. It's about the truth and belief that he can and he will if I trust. Every single time I drive through that light, I am reminded of the bird that I saw. I'm reminded and overwhelmed with the grace of God and the truth that he can and he will, but it always starts with confession and a step of faith. That's the formula. That's what it looks like whenever fear and control sort of well up in our lives. It's this idea that we have to bring that to the light and not be afraid to say it. Like if it stays in our lives and lives in the darkness and we won't admit it and we won't bring it to the light, it will control us more and more and more, and the burden only will grow more and more and more. If I don't, it won't. I'm convinced with all my life, until we are willing to confess and name and surrender our fear, it will still hold great power over our lives, and it will keep us stuck. You got any strained relationships? Got any anxiety or worry? Has your view of God gotten distorted? Who knows? Perhaps you've missed some miracles. Isn't it time to name and surrender that fear? Let go of control and live a life of faith and see that God can and that he will. That's the story he wants every single one of us to experience. That's the joy of our salvation and the freedom found in following Jesus. But it starts by responding with a step of faith, of naming our fear and surrendering it. I picture the fears in my life as something heavy that I carry. And they happen in so many different areas. It's never just my finances or just my kids or just my marriage. It's sort of all of it at once. And the more I carry, the heavier it gets, right? There's a quote from C.S. Lewis, and it says this: God wants to give us something, but he cannot because our hands are already full. See, the way we lighten our load and receive what God wants to give is we name and surrender our fear. Would you bow your heads with me in this moment? Here's what I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask just with our eyes closed, just in the quietness of this moment, would you put your hands out with your palms up? And if you're here and you know what fear you've been carrying, if you know an area of your life where control has been the name of the game for you, where anxiety and worry and strained relationships and a distorted view of God are present, would you take a minute and tell God exactly and specifically what you're holding? Like, would you name and surrender that fear right now? The beautiful thing about this is there's really not a formula. It's an honest, raw confession of fear and a faithful request that God show up and carry it for you. Now, with your hands out, with your palms up, would you just turn your palms down and let it go? And then turn your palms right back up, empty and free. Heavenly Father, thanks so much for being who you are, for constantly nudging us towards dependence on you. That's the best place for us to live from, God. May we never forget that. God, give us eyes and faith to see your miracles. God, we don't want to live a life of anxiety and worry and fear and control with our head on a swivel, always wondering, what if, what if, what if? God, give us the wisdom and quickness to know and sense when we experience that if I don't, it won't feeling, to immediately confess and let you carry it for us. Father, you promised a light burden and a free and full existence of following you as your children. Father, we are no longer slaves to fear. So God, may this become a part of our daily practice. May we not be afraid to say we're afraid. May we not feel that that's too weak, Lord. We know when we're weak is when you are made strong. So Father, for all of us, give us courage to take that step of faith. Help us to be unstuck and filled with faith. I love you, God, and thank you for being with us through this entire journey. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.